Oh,
I'll go for mine.
no, do it later, because we're going to start.
Okay.
No matter what the weather is, he's here.
Will there rain, will there snow? Good morning. How are you?
Oh,
Crack
it's not sunny
that before you
anymore.
go.
Future.
I'll wait for you to get set up, Mitch.
What?
I'll wait for you to get set up.
Sounds really awesome.
That's the only way
I
I'll
don't
leave them.
think officially, congratulations. We haven't met since you won your
It's been a while.
Shakes.
Okay, everyone, welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Traverse City Planning Commission. Today's date is December 5th. Welcome, everyone. Should we call the order, please?
Yeah, Commissioner Treadwell,
Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Tuller,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner George,
Here.
Commissioner Knapp,
Here.
Commissioner Hershey,
Here.
Commissioner Deturri.
Here.
All right, all are here, and there is a quorum.
Wonderful. Do we have announcements?
Yeah, just a couple ones to start. First and foremost, we want to welcome Jackie Anderson, who is our previous planning assistant, took a job with Eagle as a state geologist. She texted Dave and I today. It's going very well. A lot of field work out in the snow and a guide of policies thicker than our zoning ordinance that she has to follow at the state. So she's doing well. And that is all I have.
Wonderful. The next item is approval of the minutes of October 17th, 2023 special meeting. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor to approve the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Do we have any old business? Doesn't
Nope.
look like it. So we will move on to new business. And our first agenda item A is initial discussions on Planning Commission expectations and annual goals and considerations. And before we get into the discussion, I would like to make a statement. And I have copied that statement and placed it before all of you because some people like to read along. You don't have to read along, but I put it there for you. Before we begin, I would like to state for anyone observing this meeting that the agenda item we are about to discuss came 100% from me as the chair of this commission. And the comments I am about to make are purely mine. In case you don't know, I have served and worked with many boards, and at one time in my career, I was a board trainer. When you have a large turnover on any board, and we are expecting 4 new members with Ms. Anderson being the first one to join us and 3 more coming up. So when you have such a large turnover, it is common practice to discuss roles and responsibilities. As Mr. Winter and I were discussing the upcoming goal setting for the new year, it was I who suggested that one of the goals should be training about roles and responsibilities. I also selected the 4 questions that were sent out to planning commissioners to answer. The answers of those who participated are listed on this agenda item and are there simply to refer to during the discussion. The reason roles and responsibilities are addressed after a large board transition is precisely what people want from local government. A better understanding of roles often leads to more robust, productive, and in-depth discussions. What it most emphatically does not do is silence board members, in this case, called commissioners. This agenda item is so basic and so often discussed at the board level that I shouldn't have to even address it. But I'm making this statement because of appalling emails we received attacking our planning staff, accusing them of attempting to override due process and silence us as commissioners, even going so far as to accuse Mr. Winter of behaving like a Russian oligarch in one email and comparing him to Putin, a well-known mass murderer, in another email. All Mr. Winter did was include the comments of those who answered the questions into this agenda item. He did not write these comments, nor is this agenda item any type of official document or policy, nor are we voting on anything relating to this item unless something comes out of this discussion that deserves a vote. I would like to make a plea to the public. Most of us sitting here are volunteers, and we devote ourselves as a planning commission who is charged with looking at the city's future, and making the best possible decisions from information we receive from our staff professionals, from what we know of our community's values, from the laws and policies that guide us, and from thoughtful deliberation. None of us can predict the future of what this community will value in 10, 20, or 30 years from now, but the very nature of planning is forward thinking and demands that we be bold and brave and stand up for the city's future. This means we will be scrutinized, questioned on many decisions we make, and that is okay, because that is part of public discourse. But civil discourse is what I truly want to discuss. There is a simple rule to civil discourse. Do not make things personal and do not attack. This means stick to the issues. In a civil discussion, you use logic, persuasion, evidence to make a point or defend a position, but you do not attack other individuals. Attacking people and decisions, engaging in bullying behavior and name-calling is not the way to get your point across, nor does it lead to thoughtful discussions. I am not only speaking about the Planning Commission, but also for other volunteers and staff members who work hard on a variety of issues that affect the lives of Traverse City citizens. Please stop these attacks. If you are unhappy about decisions being made, get involved yourself. Join a board or a commission and make thoughtful suggestions, and more importantly, offer up possible solutions. This is a way you can help. Attacking is not. That's the end of my statement. So let's go into now this agenda item. Just give me a second. I've got to get back to my other screen. So, as I just talked about, this doesn't need to be really a long, prolonged discussion, because we're going to take up this discussion again when we are a full board. We are not, or commission, we are not full yet. We've been waiting since June, frankly, for 3 new members. But I would like to know, first of all, one thing I'm interested in is when we are a full commission, is possibly having a retreat on this topic of roles and responsibilities, and a couple of other things. Public engagement would be one. For instance, the city has a public engagement policy. We need to understand what that says and what's in it. And we don't refer to it. I don't think we've referred to it at our meetings here. So that is something we can be trained about and learn about. And roles, what is the role of you personally as a commissioner? What is the role of us together as a commission? And what is the role of staff and how that interacts with us? And then I wanted to put that public engagement piece in there. So I'm hoping maybe that's something we can do. It's a common thing also to go on retreats as a commission. It's advertised, no votes are taken, and we go and probably work with some kind of facilitator. So I wanted to know, number one, if you are interested in that type of training.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I fully support that. A big part of my life is training. It just makes sense that with the responsibilities that we have, to the public and the community, and also to all of the different written documents that are part of our purview, that, yeah, we would get some training and have an ability to ask some questions and have kind of like a neutral ground there to ask any, maybe some of the questions are a little silly, whatever, but that's how you learn it is through training. And from that, improve the process, and when we have those hard questions posed at us by the public or by some decisions that we have to make, I'm sure it'll make us stronger.
Yeah, and I think another part of that training would be maybe a review of the laws that govern us, like the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, and maybe a little bit more in-depth dive into our zoning regulations. So that would be part of it too. So, that's really why I brought this up, to see if you are interested in that.
Just, if I may, Madam Chairman, as a follow-up, it might even be possible as we go down this path of research and that maybe the board members have 1 or 2 individual topics to offer as far as that process.
Yeah, like when we figure out when it's going to be, and we can't until we know we have these 3 people, and we don't know when that's going to happen. So once we get the 3 people here, we can poll everybody to find out a good month and a good day, and then we'll work on agenda items to put in there. And Mr. Winter knows of a facilitator with, is it the Michigan Planning Association, I think you said?
Yeah, so this is a conversation that staff, including the interim city manager, myself, and others had with a planner who works for a consulting firm who does this type of training throughout the state of Michigan. She is on the board of directors for the Michigan Association of Planning. The interim city manager has an extensive work history with her, and that's why we were having this conversation. And it's something that I know the leadership at the city desires to do, and not just for the planning commission, but for also, the DDA and the city commission. What that looks like, whether that's a joint effort, so everyone understands the roles of the different boards, that's to be determined. As you all know, we're going through a time of transition where our interim city manager will be leaving. We'll have a new city manager coming on January 2nd. So we'll have to let some people get into place and resume those talks. But there seemed to be a lot of enthusiasm for that. And frankly, this is something before COVID would happen on an annual basis, but it kind of went to the wayside because of COVID and all the restrictions, and just really hasn't resumed yet since
Right.
then. So
Many of us who came on during that time haven't had any training, so.
I was going to say the only training I have had was optional. I opted into the MSU citizen planner training, and I consider that training. It was really informative, and I got a little certificate. But that was my first year, so that was years ago. This is entirely different. I think this is a good way to learn about each other and figure out where other commissioners' priorities lie, because obviously we're not all going to have the same priorities, but I think it's really informative to have that kind of cohesion so that we can then look at things that come before us and anticipate if we're going to have a longer meeting one night because more than half of the board is really passionate about that issue versus a different topic. There was one other thought, and I have since lost it. So, but I'm in full support.
if I can add one thing to that conversation is, I think many of you know, and if you don't, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC, has a program that we're certified in called a Redevelopment Ready Community. It was about a 2-year process to get certified. By achieving certification, it opens up the city to a whole lot of funding opportunities you wouldn't be eligible for otherwise, because the state wants to invest its money in communities that have become certified to become more development ready, so that they feel confident that their investment through grants and things like that will return an investment in economic development and community development and stuff like that. We're in the process of getting recertified. One of the requirements is coming up with a training policy for all the development related boards and committees, commissions, things of that nature. So this will be a requirement that we will have to implement as a policy at some point in order to maintain that certification. For example, the Mobility Action Plan is partly funded through Redevelopment Ready Community Grant funding that we were eligible for. Very easy funding to get to. Not a huge pot, but you fill out one little form, and a week later we found out we got $30,000. So that helps a lot with implementing a lot of these initiatives, but we have to meet all the requirements of that certification. So I know that's something that we'll be working with the clerk's office. I know the clerk's office is also currently working on, and maybe Ms. Miller can fill me in a little bit on this, but handbooks for all committees and commissions for new individuals.
Great.
So Ms. Anderson and I met last week, I think it was, just to go over everything, because you're thrown into it with
Yeah.
no necessary,
No onboarding.
no onboarding.
there
So we're
is
trying to improve that process as well, just from the get-go for new board members. But yeah, the training thing will be more robust to meet those RRC
Yeah,
requirements.
great. Now, one thing I just want to throw out there so I don't forget it, because I didn't really see it in the answers, but a really great part of training is about leadership styles. Like, everybody has their own style of communicating, and you can find out a lot about your fellow members by going through something like that. So I would just like to throw that in there as a potential.
If you're interested in the DISC system, I'm a certified trainer in that. And my other comment regarding a retreat is, of course, as with all training, the devil's in the details. And I'd want to be sure that we had very clear and specific objectives for
Oh,
that
yeah,
training.
for sure,
to-
yeah.
Before we went much further with it.
Yeah. That's a absolute. And you all will participate in that, in what we think is important. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also be interested in having a retreat where we can discuss the functioning of the planning commission and goals that we have, independent from, okay, we are gathered in this space with this list of agenda items that, okay, we might be, have a spark in our mind based on a discussion of some planning that, hey, here's an opportunity that we could connect it to other development in the nearby area, but we're not going to have that conversation at that point in time.
I get it.
And I appreciate the opportunity to have a training facilitated by Michigan Association of Planning. Sorry I didn't get the opportunity to do the Citizen Planner course through MSU, but that's one opportunity. I did take a course in Board of Zoning Appeal operations, and this is why I'm really glad that Michigan Association Planning is able to send somebody that can help facilitate that. There isn't as robust a system for telling planning commissions how they need to operate, how all the enabling legislation works on both the state and how it works in their specific scenario, the same way that the Michigan Municipal League has a whole elected officials academy that goes through. First, you can be your newly elected official, and they're introducing you to the basic operations, and then you can go to more advanced levels where you learn. I found out things I never would have understood otherwise about how the details of municipal finance and bonding work.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Good point. Yes, Madeline.
So my experience is obviously a little different as like a non-voting student liaison, but I know when I got into this, the previous student liaison, Ted Arnold, told me to like basically like fake it till you make it. And I think that was good advice for me because I didn't have the training or any like knowledge before. And I don't think that like for future student liaisons, they should be faking it till they make it, because I don't think that's something you should be doing, especially in this kind of role. So obviously, like, I think training would be really good, especially for a student liaison.
Wonderful.
And if I could offer one other point, just extreme sensitivity to the Open Meetings Act considerations.
It always will be. Yes, of course.
Which is important about having that discussion independent from when we actually have agenda items that we need to make decisions on.
Any other comments? Now, I don't know if, I mean, again, we don't have everybody's answers to these questions, so this is just three
And,
people's
yeah,
answers.
3 people aren't even here to make that.
Right,
contribution.
exactly. But there is one thing I want to bring up that sort of came out of the answers, but I've been thinking about for a while, and I wanted to run it by you. So in the 2 years that I've sat on this commission, occasionally a commissioner would come in with an article, and they would read a paragraph of the article, and so we did not know what the full article said. We didn't read the article, and we had to listen to somebody reading to understand it. So I would like to suggest that it's important that whatever you find, we all read it and understand it. And I think a way to do that, whether it's a website address or a printed article or a portion of a book, whatever it is, that it be included in the board packet for all of us to read it prior to the meeting. I don't know about all of you, and this is why I printed out what I said today. I'm a person that has to read along. If somebody's just droning on reading, I don't understand the context. I'm not sure how it relates to what we're talking about. So I wanted to ask how you feel about that, and that the staff would have to let us know that you have to submit whatever within a certain number of days before the board packet goes out, and then it would appear in the packet.
I like that in theory, but it does have time issues that for some things, say, I know that the master plan is now in a public, or will be in a public comment period, and then it will come back to this and the city commission to vote on and approve. But I don't know, some developer out in the ether that is going to be submitting a site plan and that will hit our agenda at some point in time. So I might not find out about a certain agenda item until I get my package on
No, that's not
Thursday
what
at
I'm,
4:30.
no, what I'm talking about is if you find an article on the internet somewhere that you think has something to do with something we have been discussing, or maybe something that's on the agenda, and you walk in as an individual with this article that none of the rest of us have read or digested, and you just start reading it. If it was in the board packet where we all could read it and understand it, it would produce better discussion. That if I just sit there listening to somebody reading something, I'm not sure I even understand the context. But if I read the whole article, I would understand the context, particularly if you pull out just one paragraph of the article and you don't know the relation to the
Or
other.
if there's a specific map or a figure or a chart that you think is
Yeah,
relevant,
it could be anything.
then at present, what we have to do is we could print it out and hand copies to everybody,
You
but
could.
if it's in the packet, then it can be on that computer, and if we have a presentation on the screen, then we can actually all see it
True.
and the public can see
True.
that
Yeah,
picture.
also if it's in the packet, the public has a shot at.
That's right. It's not
Absolutely.
just us, it's the entire
Yeah,
public
yeah.
being able to read it.
I don't know if Mr. Winter would be willing to accept this responsibility, but if we were to simply send our resources to him before the meeting, and, I share Mr. Treadwell's concern about time sensitivity and anything that prevents us from getting the most up-to-date information, I would be hesitant about. But, if we cannot via email share with each other, then perhaps we can use
Yeah, it
Mr.
would just
Winter
have
as
to be a certain number of
communication
days.
hub.
Yeah, and there can be additional materials added after the packet is published, as long as it doesn't change what the fundamental agenda item is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to send things out. I think that gets to the point that the chair is making. If it's valuable enough to share, then give it to people with enough time to digest it. And this is a practice the current mayor is trying to implement and has as her chair on various ad hocs. If you want people to be able to respond on the committee to the reading, you got to at least give them the opportunity to take it in. So I can always, if something's sent to me, and people do this a lot, they'll send an article or something like, hey, please share with the planning commission from another commissioners, because you guys can't email each other, and I'm happy to do that. The other thing for the public's benefit is, the packet comes out Thursday at the end of the day. If something came to me on Friday that you wanted shared, I could put it in the packet and republish it and then re-notify the subscribers so that they're notified that it has been updated with more information and things like that. Because I think that just goes back to the whole transparency and, to everyone on the commission and the public as well.
Like, for the city commission packet was published on Thursday, but it did not include additional materials from Lauren about the amendments to the city's pilot ordinance. And then those were published at a later, or added to the packet at a later point, and there was an announcement sent out that, hey, the new materials are now available.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I think as long as it doesn't inhibit the timeline of publishing packets, but I don't see why it would. When I first started on the board, it was definitely more common. I think it was just an understanding that if there were ever a resource, you would pass it to Russ, and Russ would pass it to the entire board. I think we have gotten away from that a little bit, which then leads to these moments where articles get brought up or brought in, and I don't have any time or resources to be able to fact check. I have in the past sometimes pulled it up in the meeting because I really am audio visual learner, so I do need to see it. I can't just hear stats rattled off without seeing it. So yeah, I appreciate it. It makes sense to me.
Okay, so it sounds like we have agreement there. I don't think we have to vote on that particular. Okay, so before we get to number 4, which is talking about the objectives for the coming year, just a beginning discussion on that, does anybody else have anything to say about any of the other things that appear here?
Well, I didn't have a chance to participate earlier because before my meeting with Mr. Winter, I really had no baseline
Right.
knowledge to be making those sorts of judgments from. But if you don't mind my reading, and I don't have hard copies for everyone, my apologies, but this is brief. Just my expectations of my own role on the commission. I have 4 items. One is that I intend to be a well-informed participant in setting Planning Commission objectives, goals, and strategies. I intend to demonstrate active listening and critical thinking. I would like to establish respectful and professional working relationships with my commission colleagues and staff, and that I'd like to facilitate communication between the Planning Commission and its stakeholders. So I hope that you can take those in the positive tone with which they're offered, and I think our dynamics as a team are going to be really critical to making forward progress. So
And if I may, I would add one more thing to that last item, is your communication conduit also between this body and the city commission.
I consider them a stakeholder.
Yeah, well, true, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
thank you. Okay, so I'm not hearing anything. So just know that when we get the, and you could answer these questions at the same time because you weren't officially on when these questions went out. So when we get the new people, those four of you will have a chance to do the questions. And if anybody else has not submitted answers, you too can also answer these questions. And I think then these answers will form some of the basis of the discussion at the retreat.
So do you have any need to discuss them now? Because I did bring in some thoughts as far as,
I mean, you could, if you want to, sure, but we aren't a full board. This was just sort of a beginning discussion, but if you would like to, go right ahead.
okay, here goes. One of the things that I noted about the 2023 and 2022 objectives is that there's been some inconsistency in terminology even as to what is a goal and what is an objective, and they seem to be used rather interchangeably. And one of my suggestions from my experiences with goal setting and strategic planning would be that we try to have a common understanding about those things. So I have suggestions of some potential objectives and related goals that would support reaching those objectives. So for instance, one of the objectives I would like considered would be just a demonstration of respect and value for the perspectives of citizens, and goals that to support that might look like beginning a longitudinal quarterly study of citizen satisfaction by a particular date. I arbitrarily chose middle of next year. Another goal might be to evaluate our current community input strategies for their accuracy and for their usefulness, and by the end of next year, recommend best practices for that for major future projects. Another potential objective might be transforming the capital improvement planning process into a strategic tool that supports the Planning Commission and citywide priorities. And clearly there's already been action on this, but establishment of the design team that coordinates implementation of capital improvement projects across the functional areas. And then also, this is something that Sean and I discussed on Friday, but establishing an enterprise dashboard that's accessible to staff and officials and the public that would connect these high-level objectives and goals with the budget planning and city operations processes. And then the third one is much more grounded in our particular function, and that was enact land use policies that demonstrate long-term environmental stewardship. And the related goal might be to require professional environmental impact statements as part of all of our land use decisions, and to try to accomplish that, say, by September of next year. So I would really love to see us adopting goals that are SMART goals, so they're measurable and they're time-bound, and so hopefully there will be some nuggets in there that we might consider at a future date.
So please hold on to those so that when we get everybody else here and everybody finishes answering them, we can have it in one long document. Okay, thank you. Anybody else, because, so Ms. Anderson took us to number 4, which is where I was heading. So does anybody else, and you've seen what some people have talked about, housing discussion, riparian buffers, what else was on there? Workforce housing issues, density issues, mixed-use development. Does anybody else have anything to add to what is there in number 4?
I will, but I'll wait until we have,
The full board, okay.
yes.
Great. So, question for you, Mr. Winder. Under 2023 annual goals, the 3 that are there, we just can put those on hold until the full commission is here?
Yeah, and I can just speak briefly, kind
Yeah.
of an update on some of those and some of the other
That'd be
things
great.
that were mentioned. So
Okay.
there were 3 overarching goals from the 2023 annual goals of the Planning Commission. And the first was to complete and adopt the Master Plan and Mobility Action Plan. So the Mobility Action Plan draft is essentially completed at this point. And the master plan is going to be in the final stages of getting wrapped up here shortly. As has been discussed previously, we're kind of in a holding pattern because of the lack of a commission. At one point, we were facing potentially 2 new city commission liaisons in addition to our 3 vacancies. So that would have been a majority of the board turnover. So it didn't seem fair to the incoming commissioners to not be part of the review, but then once they get seated, to ask them to vote to approve it. So as an update, I know the City Commission Ad Hoc Committee that will be interviewing the Planning Commission candidates will be held December 12th. Now, there isn't another City Commission meeting until after the first of the year, so it would likely be in January. January 8th is the next meeting, which would be a study session. Given the length of time from last night to January 8th, it's very likely that that would be a special meeting to make decisions, because they'll have to approve expenditures and things like that by then. So hopefully we'll have those people selected at that point, and then we can start moving forward. The goal there is to review those plans with the Planning Commission first. The Planning Commission, by law, has to, through resolution, vote to adopt the master plan. The Mobility Action Plan will be a subtopic plan within the master plan, so it'll be part of that adoption. And we set it up that way, so when we do have other subtopic or sub-area plans, sorry, that would be a subtopic plan, they could be amended into the master plan so that they have the same weight as the master plan, because they are essentially part of it. By law, though, the Planning Commission will send it to the legislative body, the City Commission, who has to, through resolution, open it up for the mandatory 63-day review period. So once the Planning Commission is done with their review, it'll go to the City Commission. Ideally, they will open it up for the public review period, so that 63-day clock starts. During that time period, we will review the drafts with the City Commission as well, and then have our public open houses or community engagement events and things like that. It's only once the 63-day window closes that the Planning Commission can hold their mandatory public hearing and then by action adopt the plan. Now, there's a call out in the Planning Enabling Act that says that by ordinance, a city can require that the legislative body also has to approve the plan as well, and the city commission has done that. So both the planning commission have to approve it, and then the city commission has to approve it. In some communities, it just stops with the planning commission. So it's a lengthy process that's prescribed in the Planning Enabling Act, but that's intentional so that people have time to comment and digest it and things like that. So that's where we will be with those plans. The next one was expand housing opportunities. So as you know, on June 6th, a number of proposed changes were sent to the City Commission. It was in October that they took action on it. Some of you have expressed a desire to explore other components of housing. I'll address more of that in a second. So depending what comes out of your goal-setting session, that may direct some of that. And then, of course, we have the riparian buffer zone ordinance that has been out there. I'm happy to announce, if I haven't already, that Leslie Sichterman, the current Long Lake Township Planning Director and Traverse City resident, she lives by Mr. Knapp, in fact, will be joining us Monday for the new Deputy Planner / Sustainability Coordinator position. So having that is going to be a huge help to staff just to have that additional capacity. And we're quite fortunate that we're getting someone with such experience to come on board and help us at such a critical time. So
who's taking over at Long Lake?
I do not know yet. So, so that, I imagine, just based on what I've heard already, is still a priority. So I'm sure that hopefully we'll be working on that in this coming year. So I did point out some other considerations for you. The Mobility Action Plan and the Master Plan will have an action plan component, so recommendations of things to do. There's kind of this weird timing issue where at the beginning of the year is when the Planning Commission adopts its goals, and sometimes later we're going to see the action plan. The goals could be revisited later in the calendar year. The Master Plan in particular is being set up so that the action plan items are realistically what can be achieved in a 5-year timeline, given financial resources, staff capacity, and things like that, even though the plan looks out 20 years. And the reason we're doing that is because, you know, time is dynamic and conditions change. The Planning Enabling Act requires that a master plan be reviewed every 5 years and updated as necessary. So what the goal is after 5 years, we will go through that process. We will look at the action plan, identify what has been achieved, what still needs to be achieved, and then set a new action plan of what for the next 5 years need to be done in order to keep that vision, keep implementing towards that vision. Now, what we're doing is we had an action plan created with the consultants and department staff as a rough starting point. That was then distributed to all the city departments for feedback, so the list grew. And then we had a series of, I think, 6 stakeholder group meetings, and the list grew even more. So if you can imagine, it became like 137 items. So when communities have an action plan that lists that many items, everyone's frozen with a sense of overwhelmingness. No one knows who's doing what and what's happening. So that's why we're trimming it down to really what can be done in the first 5 years. But we're keeping all that feedback through the public process that will be in the appendix of the master plan. So when we revisit it, all that information and recommendations are still going to be there to draw upon so that we can really work on building off this initial planning effort. So that is the master plan mobility action plan. I did mention in there that in 2023, the City Commission adopted the building electrification policy. So there may be an opportunity to look at some of our zoning standards to see what maybe needs to be changed in our zoning to either remove barriers or better support the implementation of that policy. I believe I included a copy of that in your packet. Okay. Also sent out per the interim city manager for your reference only at this point is the city's resolution towards decarbonization and climate resiliency. So these two items are kind of tied together. So I wanted to have that in your hand now for reference as we roll into January and start discussing goals. I did address under other considerations the effort to add more variety to the housing stock in the city, which is what the Planning Commission had worked on for the last few years. Although recommended by the Planning Commission, the triplexes and quadplexes were not supported at this time by the City Commission when they took their action in October. One thing that was heard from the public a lot through that process is concern of what a triplex or quadplex would look like within the character of the community. So I linked for you, and some of us talked informally before the start of the meeting. The Michigan Municipal League put together this book called, or this document called Pattern Book Homes. And so for those who don't know what that is, for quite a few decades in this country, you could order a house through a catalog, and it would come as a kit, and you would be able to put it together as a house. But you would know what the house looked like beforehand, and the plans would be all configured as part of that purchase. Sears was a huge proponent of it, and it was this type of housing that filled the housing need for much of the Metro Detroit area when the auto industry really took off. It was a way for them to implement housing quite quickly. So MML has created a similar document. So they have two different models, one being a duplex, one being a quadplex. So one thought that had been talked about through all of this process is that perhaps allowing triplexes and quadplexes in the R2 if they are one of these pattern book homes. Now, if you had the chance to look at MML, it's not that every house is going to look the same. There's variety within them, whether it's going to have dormers or things like that, and the plans reflect that. And to be honest, that is very common for housing here in Traverse City. Marty McLeod, anybody know of her? And she wrote the book, I think, Traverse City's Old South Side, and she has a great section on there about the 2Zs, the 3Zs, where if you go around town, you'll see houses, like 3 of them that they all look the same. She's like, because people used to share blueprints and then they would just build the house. So it's kind of how things were done back in the day. So I did talk to someone at MEDC this week who has been working with the city of Muskegon, and they have some really great plans that he said he would be sharing with me for triplexes and duplexes. So maybe that can be part of the conversation if the Planning Commission wants to, dive into that a little more. We can bring some of those plans together and see how they can work. The benefit to that as well on the affordability side is it speeds up the process because the plans would be pre-approved, and because they're pre-approved, they don't have to pay the architectural engineering fees that come with building a new home. That saves money on the front end as well.
So is this pattern book home something this commission has to vote on and then the city commission has to vote on?
Well, it would depend. If we had the pattern books on file, no one would have to vote on it. But right now, triplexes and duplexes aren't allowed in the R2. So that would require an amendment, which would take the Planning Commission, City Commission. So a recommendation of the Planning Commission and the City Commission. So it could be part of a larger conversation, and maybe that's an opportunity if we do this joint board training to ask those kind of questions, It's nice, and we have 2 City Commission liaisons, to have some direction from the City Commission before the Planning Commission invests a lot of time and effort in something, whether it's something they'd be willing to consider supporting. You're not going to ask, like, are you going to approve this if we send it to you? But, do you support this effort on our part? So that's one thing on the housing front I wanted to mention, and that has more to do with housing variety. On the affordability front, as I mentioned, the state passed a lot of new legislation, one being the new pilot ordinance, which the city has so far approved 3, I believe, right? 2 for Innovo
2
and
were-
1 for East Bay Flats under the new ordinance?
No, the East Bay Flats was under the old ordinance.
It was just a renewal?
Yes.
Okay, so,
Well, it's the renewal, but also changing the ownership structure, which changes the fundamental terms of the pilot, because one of the partners is stepping out and another partner is stepping in.
and they were, I think, changing the pilot percentage too, to
Yes.
serve a lower income bracket. So with the new pilot ordinance, previously, you had to also receive low-income housing tax credit financing from the Michigan State Housing Development Authority in order to apply the local pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. So instead of traditional property taxes, you pay a set rate, usually a percentage of rent that's collected. The new pilot ordinance doesn't allow for, or doesn't require that you be tied to LIHTC or the low-income housing tax credit. So it makes communities like Traverse City more nimble in how it can apply pilots. Frankly, the score that MSHDA uses for LIHTC doesn't set communities like us up well to score high enough. Technically, we're still a rural community. So when they look at things for scoring, they look at walkability, how close are you to public transit, amenities like grocery stores, all things we have, but not at the same caliber as a city, or a larger city. The other things that make it hard is you don't score well when you're located close to things that can be maybe a negative impact on quality of life. So being next to a wastewater treatment plant or an airport, and unfortunately, you can't go very far in our city and not be close to one of those. So this helps us better address our community's unique affordable housing needs than being tied to LIHTC. Now, there are other pieces of legislation that were passed, and this is where the Planning Commission could potentially play a role. There's the Attainable Housing Act, which allows for tax incentives for projects that are 4 dwelling units or less. So that could be something, it would require a city commission policy, but could be applied to an ADU. We heard that a lot in our master plan when we went around to like the different neighborhood listening sessions, is they're like, well, yeah, but if I build an ADU, now my taxes are gonna rise like crazy, you know? And so how do they offset that? Well, maybe that's one way, is through the Attainable Housing Act. Of course, it needs to be tied to affordability. So, you know, there's gonna be a lot of paperwork and financial tracking associated with that. The Residential Facilities Act is very similar. It offers a tax abatement, but that is for projects that are 5 or more dwelling units. And that doesn't have to be in the same building. It could be 5 single-family homes, or with the other act, it could be 4 single-family homes, or things like that. So it doesn't have to be a multifamily. LIDTAC and Pilot almost always was traditionally for multifamily buildings.
And it tends to be on the larger scale of multifamily,
Yes.
such that even Homestretch, which likes to do in the 8 to 20 unit
It makes it
development,
hard for them to get the
they don't
funding.
score as well.
Yep, and so that's why you see the former pilot being applied to things like Annika Place, Ruth Park, that Woda Cooper has done, Traverse City Housing Commission, their Parkview Affordable Senior Living by the Civic Center, that was one, but again, that's 46 units. It's not a small, you know, more neighborhood scale development. And the other one on there is the Neighborhood Enterprise Zone. So the reason I bring those 3 up is because they all require establishing a district or districts where those incentives can be used. And this is where the Planning Commission with the master plan can say, you know what, based on this future land use map, this would be a good place to have more housing. Well, let's incentivize it by making one of these legislative tax abatement districts in that area. And there's 2 ways to approach this, and there are, I guess, philosophical differences. One is, you know, you wait till the developers come to you and they say, hey, we want to do affordable housing, and then but from my experience, developers like predictability. So we should really probably be in front of this and establish those districts so we can direct them where we want it, waiting then to play, you know, catch up with what they're desiring. So that would be something that I would recommend for your consideration as that rolls up. There have been some new changes that I still have to understand much about that we won't do a lot with, but now housing is an eligible reimbursable expense under the Brownfield Authority Act, Act 381, where before it was, you know, demolition of obsolete buildings, environmental remediation, but now housing projects can be reimbursed through the brownfield funding and the tax capture that comes off of that. So for those of you that maybe are not aware, we do have a county brownfield redevelopment authority, so it's administered by the county. Deputy Administrator Chris Forsyth is very active in that, and he's been a great partner to the city on helping us understand how we can use brownfield dollars to better implement some of these plans. And there's another county tool as well out there, and that's the Land Bank Authority. So the county holds properties in the land bank, including some in the city. One example would be north of Oriana, between the old warehouses on Lake Street and the TART Trail is the old railroad corridor that goes up to 8th. Some of you that have been around a while may recall like a Boardman Lake Avenue that was once proposed to go up through there. Well, that property is being held in the county land bank. It is set that all the city has to do is write the county a letter and the ownership gets transferred to us. But a decision was made under the previous city manager to leave it in the land bank for now because the land bank has funding that could help fund improvements to that property. Doesn't mean it's going to stay in the land bank forever, but maybe there's some remediation that needs to take place that the land bank can help fund, where if we pull it out of the land bank, then we're not eligible for those funds. So we're just trying to be strategic in how we use
But
those.
there could be other pots of money that we're eligible for that they aren't, that at some point where we can clearly identify that situation, we can pull that out and then get those pots of money to do that site work.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, it's been a great experience working with the county and collaborating on some of these projects lately. I'll just throw this out there now too, as housing, as we in September received a letter from HUD, Housing and Urban Development Authority, that based on our census population, we are now a CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, entitlement grantee. So that opens us up to approximately $372,000 annually of federal funding that can go towards a variety of projects, primarily projects aimed for low to moderate income housing, whether that is setting up a housing rehabilitation fund, which a lot of communities do. We talked with someone from Port Huron. They have partnered essentially with their Commission of Aging, and so they have 5 eligible projects that they will go into homes of seniors, and it will pay to replace water heaters and things like that. They're aging to help seniors stay in their homes as they get older, as the homes get older, that is, not the people. Because aging homes need maintenance, and a lot of times seniors have a fixed income. If anyone's familiar with federal funding, there's a lot of paperwork and strings attached, but we can use a percentage of that funding for administration. So we may end up hiring someone to, like hiring a consultant essentially to manage it for us, so that we don't have the legacy costs of retirement and healthcare and things like that. 15% of that money each year can go to public services. So that, for instance, could be to help fund shelter operations or something like that. So we're learning a lot about this. Our HUD regional field office is in Detroit. This is new to us, and for the staff working there, we're the first new entitlement grantee to come on board since the staff's been there. It just doesn't happen. The state of Michigan's losing population in general. We're one of the only regions growing, so this hasn't happened in a long time. So we're all learning together. We've had a lot of collaborative conversations, and we had one just last week with a number of stakeholders that are working in the arena of housing and homelessness, frankly. We know we have this situation at the Pines. We know we have other funds that we might be able to leverage, whether that's the opioid settlement funds that are coming. We get a certain amount of money directly to the city, as does the county, for every dispensary, cannabis dispensary, that's operating in the city. Last year, based on the number we have this year, it would have been about $800,000. That would have been annually. That amount of money will likely go down as more dispensaries open up throughout the state, because it's divided by how many dispensaries there are. But you can hopefully see where we're working together to take all these pools of money and efforts and really figure out how we can leverage them for the issue of housing affordability in the city.
And most of the creative projects that you just proposed would still have to go through like city commission. Like all of those
Depending on the
things
size
mostly
of
would. Yeah, the only thing that we would have purview over would be like the one where we talked about creating special zones that could apply, right? It's still under the guise of like, we can provide recommendations for zones that should be impacted or policies that should be created to encourage housing around those issues. But at the end of the day, it still goes through the city because they're like the financial, like almost police power situation, right?
Yeah, so all
Okay.
those that I mentioned would require a policy to be adopted by the city commission. But this is where hopefully the city commission would lean on the planning commission as the body tasked with overseeing land use to help
Got it.
inform them on where it makes the most sense to kind of direct those incentives.
Yeah,
to get
so
the
as
planned
it's
outcome.
not backwards, like they're not then coming to us because they want to initiate some of these programs. We bring those recommendations to them, and then they like either tell us fix it a little bit or we approve.
Yeah, and I think maybe it'd make most sense to work together from the beginning on it.
Yeah.
And we do have, again, 2 city commissioner liaisons here to help us with this. And I would maybe make it analogous to the adult use cannabis. There was the police power ordinance that the ad hoc committee worked on, but there was also the zoning ordinance component that established the overlays where that use was allowed, and we kind of did them in tandem and
Okay,
things like
that's what
that.
I was looking for,
Yeah.
and I didn't use the proper word, is like, we would create the visual overlay of the recommended areas. But, yeah, okay, we're on the same page.
More
We
than
can
likely.
make recommendations about non-planning and zoning related things that still fall into the same general category. But
Yeah.
we can't just pass along, okay, these are our proposed zoning, and we're also doing these things, but those are just advisory recommendations.
Right.
And this goes again to our city commissioners. I know that there's a heavy or often used ad hoc format where there's like 3 city commissioners, but there has been times in the past where these type of issues have been addressed with not just city commissioners, but the committee that comes up with the draft may also include planning commissioners or other key stakeholders so that, everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction, if you will, and
That'd be great.
not working independently.
I had wondered if a committee would be a good structure for
Yeah.
this kind of
Because
thing.
there's so much coming
Yeah.
down the pike that has to be delved into, and, yeah, I love that idea.
You got Chief.
Chief?
Hey, how you doing?
Sorry.
Thank you. Sean, if we can go back just a sec, I think you meant, when you were talking about Oriana's and the land bank, I think you meant south of Oriana, not north of Oriana?
No, it's actually the property north between Oriana and 8th Street, east of Lake.
Like that big parking
There you
lot.
go.
Yep.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
Yep.
Yep,
Yeah.
no, that makes sense now. Thanks for explaining that. Also, too, regarding pattern book homes, like I had mentioned before the meeting, I read through that, and they don't look like multifamilies.
Yeah.
They look a lot like some of the homes we have in Traverse City right now. And I was support in, after the weather breaks, maybe a field trip to Muskegon
Okay.
for staff.
Yeah.
Burn a day, go down there,
Yeah.
meet their planning staff, take a tour of some of these places.
Yeah.
So then we have a better understanding of what we're deciding about and discussing and things like that. It's 2 hours away.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I will say we've talked about that at a high level a number of times here, because in the community I used to live in, I think it was every year, it could have been every other year, but they would pick a partner city where planning commissioners, staff, elected official, key stakeholders for various nonprofits, they would all travel to that city,
Yeah,
spend a week, tour, learn how they operate, things like that, and then later in the year, that city would come
sure.
to our city and
Yeah.
they would do the
Switch.
same thing.
Yeah. We had a pretty successful run down to Grand Rapids with the group 4 or 5 years
Yeah.
ago.
We're hearing
It
about
was
that.
before COVID.
Yeah.
And learned a lot. We were able to talk to our contemporaries down there, and it was very valuable, I thought.
Good.
So,
Great idea.
thank you.
Yeah, great idea, thank you.
Any other things for this topic, because then we're going to move on to capital improvement plan. So let's move on to your
Let's zip to the sip.
capital improvement plan update.
Yeah, so this is just an update since we haven't met in a number of weeks, and we're probably not gonna, I don't see us necessarily having to meet until the end of the year, but the CIP process is underway. As many of you know, as we've discussed, the CIP process has been getting revamped for a couple years now. It really got away from its original purpose of being a staff-created plan that is used to inform the budget, and one that is created based on the condition of our current assets, the capital that we have to maintain, as well as any capacity improvements that we need to implement, as well as the implementation of the recommendations in our various planning documents and guides and policies and things like that. So one thing that we've done to help improve the CIP over the last 2 years is create thresholds and definitions of what qualifies for a CIP. Because things are being put in the CIP that really should just be budget items, because they're maintenance projects, they're reoccurring costs, things like computers. I mean, today a computer is just an office supply essentially, So we had those 4 criteria, but it does get a little gray speaking with our new GIS/IT manager, Jerry Swanson. He's planning it out there. As we live in a digital age now, our capital needs to include digital capital. Like there's one thing about replacing a laptop on a regular schedule. It's another thing when you have to upgrade the whole city's servers. So those, we may see a 5th bullet point added for criterion that includes that digital capital. But there still is much work to be done. One of the things that is helping us right now, which was a recommendation out of the Mobility Action Plan, which again hasn't been adopted yet, but this aligned with something that the interim city manager wanted to see, is we now have that design team. So the design team is a mandatory meeting every Tuesday that includes the department heads of all the development-related departments. So engineering, municipal utilities, DPS, DDA, we include parking services, light and power, planning. We're the ones that actually coordinate the effort and set the agendas and chair the meetings and things like that. And we have a little more presence on that committee than others, in that the deputy planner, with her role as sustainability coordinator, is in the policy as a mandatory attendee as well. That doesn't mean that other staff members can't come. They're listed as guests that will present on their project. So for instance, Alex Yaki is serving as the interim city engineer for right now. He was the sponsor of a project, meaning, you got to go through one of the members to get your project on the agenda. But Zach Cole was the one who came and presented on Veterans Drive, because he's the one who's working on that design. And what it's helping us do is break down our silos, because we're all working together and we're learning from each other. I'm learning things about engineering and things that I never would have otherwise thought of, but we're all stronger when we figure out how the other departments function and things like that. And the CIP is playing into this as well. So this is where, when we see projects in the CIP, we're going to work together to start designing them, figuring out all the coordinated efforts that need to go in for the different departments, and have a stronger project that gets entered and a more realistic cost too of what it's going to be to make that work. So with that, the CIP has been moving forward. Since there is much work to be done to it, the city manager, we had a mandatory meeting, and has requested that no new projects get put in. He's trying to get away from this idea or the use of the CIP as a wish list, where people just throw things in there and no consideration to actual staff capacity or financial resources to make it a reality. When we get into that habit, then it loses its purpose as a tool to inform the budget each year. And that doesn't mean that things in the CIP are all that can be put in the budget. If people had a project that they wanted budgeted that year, the city commission approves the budget, and the city commissioners are elected to represent those people. That's how it can be funded that way. This is really just capital projects based on capacity issues, asset management, and plan implementation.
It doesn't exist in our CIP process currently, but a way that we could have essentially a city wish list of visionary projects that we lack capacity for now, but when it's on that plan of something that we would like to see, when we get an unexpected grant opportunity, or we're redoing some other aspect of this corridor, and hey, now there's an opportunity to put a sidewalk that we didn't have funding for as a standalone project, but we can actually work it into the plan now.
Yeah, of course, because anytime, it's a plan,
Yeah.
right? It's not an adopted budget or anything like that. So a funding source comes available to fund something that's not in the CIP, and the city commission feels that that's a worthy investment and they can make the match, then of course they can do that. It's not limited just to the CIP.
Yeah, but I'm saying a way to have that as secondary to the CIP, just an additional list of projects that we might like to see.
That could be possible. Based on the guidance and the direction that we're given by our boss, that will not be part of the CIP. And
Got it.
It
have
might
to-
be something else, so you don't
Yeah.
lose, I think what you're trying to say is we don't want to lose this list, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
And
has to be somewhere.
Yeah, and someone can keep track of that, but that is not the CIP, and that is what we've been told not to include in this process. So if there needs to be another process of wish list items, that's fine. One thing that was reiterated to me, because the question has come up, like, how does the public get projects in the CIP? Well, that's what we have planning for, and public engagement, and they give feedback, and then the plan comes up with project recommendations that then funnel into the CIP. So that's kind of how that process overall is designed to work. So with that, staff has been working this last month on their various projects. Honestly, planning doesn't have many, because we more coordinate these efforts. We don't, we're not the engineers, we're not designing, we're not providing those cost estimates and things like that. So everyone's updating their own projects that are in there already. As you know, cost of materials are going up, so they're looking at, some of these things have been sitting in there for 5 years. And over the course of 5 years, we know it's going to cost a lot more than what that number was that was put in 5 years ago. So everyone's making those adjustments at this time. The only new projects that the interim city manager supported being put in is if it really, if not doing it, served as a threat to property or life, public safety type issues, or if it's a project that's tied to a funding source that has been approved. Like, for instance, we have the state revolving clean water fund and the sanitary sewer fund. So that has a 5-year list of projects that had to be created by a consultant in order for us to be eligible for those low interest loans from the state. So those projects have to be in there. And most of those have been put in already, but they're, like all plans, things shift through time as, you may have something in the plan, and even though the state approved you to be eligible, you don't get funded for that year. So then you got to move things around and keep the plan going. So that's where we are with that right now. We have a mandatory meeting with the interim city manager on December 19th to go over these projects. There'll be a couple smaller meetings in January where the different department head representatives of their projects will inform the city manager to make sure that they know what the project entails, because the city manager is the one that drafts up the budget, so they need to fully understand what is in the CIP. Most importantly for the upcoming year of the 6-year timeline, because that's the budget that's going to be presented to the city commission. So this will likely be coming to you in the beginning of February to set the public hearing. So under the Planning Enabling Act, the Planning Commission has to hold a public hearing on the CIP, and they have to make the determination that the projects in the CIP are not inconsistent with the master plan. So a simple analogy for that is, and we don't have a lot of this as we're a fairly developed community, and I use this example with Ms. Anderson, but if your master plan had a portion of the community in the future land use had it identified as conservation, right? And the CIP is talking about putting a road, a water, and a sewer to that property or that area, that would be inconsistent, because now you're trying to invest public infrastructure to support development in an area that the plan is saying this is not where development should occur at this time.
Or similarly, if we have an area targeted for future multifamily or industrial use, and the CIP is having a 4-inch water main going to that rather than something larger, because
Yeah, that could be an example as well. So that's the role the Planning Commission plays in the CIP process. And then the Planning Commission adopts a CIP. It simply gets sent to the City Commission as receive and file, because again, it's a staff-created document that's used by the city manager to inform the budget that the City Commission approves. So they don't have to take action on it. It just goes to them for reference so they can see the projects that are coming up.
Can we anticipate a much shorter CIP than previous?
I would not use the word much at this time. There have been some things that have been taken out from
So,
previous
like,
years, but we have been trimming it down each year. One thing that makes a CIP challenging, and this comes back to the software that we use, is, one project may be funded from numerous funds. So it may, if you're looking at the report that breaks things down by funds, you might see a portion of a street reconstruction listed under the water fund because the water main is going to be replaced. And then you're going to see it again under the sewer fund because a sewer main is going to be replaced at the same time. And then you're going to see it in probably the DPS fund because, oh, guess what? All the street trees are going to be planted come out of that fund. And so
and each
it's-
part is 3 pages.
Yeah, right.
Add to
Therefore,
the
not
package.
shorter.
Yeah, and that's just when you see them listed by fund. When you look at the report that includes all the narrative and all that stuff, it's just not a great system that we use. So we're
we
going to be
might be
exploring
seeing
different ones.
like 350 pages rather than 613.
Last year's was much better than previous years, so I think we're going in the
We're
right
moving
direction.
in the right direction, yeah,
Yeah,
but
it's
it's
true.
it's
It's
about
slow.
The way it had
learning.
an interactive opportunity to view it and to
Yeah.
pick out specific
And to
types of
sort.
projects
Yeah, that'd be
was
great.
a lot.
Yeah, and
helpful.
it's again, we're learning a new process
Mhm.
as we go. So we're constantly working to make it better. Plenty of work ahead, but we all find it important when, again, as we begin to work together more than we have in the past, it's just making it all much easier. I think Jackie has a question.
A couple of questions about your memo. You referenced qualifying private developments, and somehow I hadn't realized that the capital improvement program would be related to private development. So I was wondering if you could fill me in about that. And then also, in terms of timing with finalizing the master plan, if we're attempting in February to align the capital improvement plan with the master plan that isn't yet approved, do we look backward and align with the currently in effect master plan, or how does that work?
Yeah, so to your latter question, yes, we go with the master plan that's in effect
In
right
effect.
now. And just like the setting of goals, we do have this weird timeline of the cart before the horse, because shortly after, but we have to do this prior to the budget season starting for the city commission, and by charter, I think that has to be adopted the first meeting in June, if I'm correct. So there are some timing issues that we have to follow in that. So looking back at the memo, the qualifying private developments, that was in reference to the design team.
Oh, thank
So the
you.
design team, in addition to looking at the CIP and public projects, when we say qualifying private developments, like for instance, we had one on today's agenda, that is private developments that trigger the stormwater ordinance. So basically, commercial developments or residential more than 3 properties. So today, we looked at it, and, the fire department had comments. The project we were looking at was the Housing Commission's senior living at the Tebow Florist, because they submitted for their land use permits, and we all got to talk together about, where the fire suppression line's gonna come in, access to the building, things like that. And we recommended approval with a couple conditions, like for instance, one being, since it is on 8th Street, there will be no road closures associated with the construction of this project while 8th Street is being used as a detour for the parkway. So, it's
Oh,
like,
right.
had we not been working together, we may have overlooked that, but someone brought it up, like, hey, we don't want this road closed during that time period, and so they need to sequence their construction timeline to make sure that that doesn't happen.
That helps considerably.
Yeah, so those are the qualifying projects, but you are correct, the CIP is public projects. Yep.
Any other questions?
So I will add, when for those that may be new to this process, typically what happens is when the CIP comes to the Planning Commission for them to set the public hearing, we have a study session in between the two. So what we will ask of you is to review the projects. If you have any specific questions, to email them to us, and then we will reach out to those various department heads to get the answers. If that response does not satisfy and you need them to come to the meeting to discuss, they're willing to do that, but we'd like to respect their time and not have them just come for Tuesday evening if they don't have to, if their answer is quick and can be addressed otherwise. But we like to do it that way because, again, all these other departments are submitting their CIP projects, and Katie and I aren't the ones to talk to you about why a 12-inch water main is the right answer down, 7th Street or something like that. We just don't know, so.
But I do know the person to ask about that.
Yes.
Right, yes,
Yes. At design team, I learned it was totally fine to tie a 6-inch lead into an 8-inch main, and I'm just like, I didn't know that yesterday, but I guess
Look
I
at
know
the
that
things
today.
you
I don't know if I'll ever need to
learn.
know that again, but.
Yeah.
The
now I
reverse
do.
could cause some issues, but
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and any other comments or questions under new business? And if not, we will move on to reports. Board of Zoning Appeals.
hasn't met, and our
Hasn't met?
meeting for next week's already been canceled.
That's right. I think January is what I read. Grand Traverse Commons Joint Planning Commission?
No, we really meet quarterly. The
Okay.
next meeting would be in January. It always interferes because Martin Luther King Day pushes all our meetings back.
Yeah.
And so it usually gets moved to either the last Wednesday or the last Wednesday of January, first Wednesday of February. I think it's the last Wednesday of January this year. I think I mentioned at our previous meeting that through the brownfield that exists at the Commons, the Brownfield Authority approved up to $400-some thousand to do a infrastructure assessment out there at the Commons. We worked with the township engineering firm, Gordy Frazier, as well as Hubble Roth Clark, which the city uses for infrastructure as a consultant. And they worked together to conduct that assessment. And they had a scope of work. They only spent about $165,000 of what was approved. But having been out there in the field and conducting their scope of work, they did come up with additional recommendations. So when we do meet, we may be looking at expanding that project a little bit. They were only working within the boundaries of the Commons. But when you take issues like stormwater, contributing factors outside that boundary impact the Commons. So that was brought
Both
up. and it
contributing
may be-
factors and potential solutions.
Exactly. So those are things that maybe, round 1.2 of this process, if you will. But again, we meet quarterly. That report was submitted. It was presented to the Brownfield Authority, the ones that approved the financing for it. And next, it will just be sent to the City Commission and the Township Board for their receive and file. That's all we
Thank you.
got.
City Commission.
We've met a couple times now. We approved the homestretch pilot that,
Or the
And-
conditional rezoning?
yes.
Yeah.
The conditional rezoning. They had applied for a pilot, but that's a separate process than what we did. But that's what came from the Planning Commission. We have done a couple pilots, as you already mentioned. And critically, we've set an ad hoc that's going to be meeting next Tuesday. I don't recall the specific time off the top of my head, but it will be next Tuesday to interview candidates and hopefully select people to fill the 3 vacancies. Right there.
Excellent.
Our first meeting, or our next meeting, is scheduled to be the first meeting of the year on January 8th. It is currently set to be a study session since it's the second Monday. But if we have additional business, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a gas purchase order and some other stuff that we would need to approve. Then we would be able to also approve all the appointments that have been interviewed for and recommendations have been made. So that would mean by the regularly scheduled study session of the Planning Commission on January 16th, that we could be back to a full Planning Commission.
Excellent. Planning Department, do you have anything else to say?
I don't think anything beyond what I've rattled off
Lots
so
going
far.
on
Again,
there.
we welcome Katie. She's diving right in. We're looking forward to Leslie starting. Frankly, it's a good time to be onboarding. It is a little quieter without a
Yeah.
city commission meeting this month again, and things get slow. But yeah, it's good. We're feeling pretty good.
Wait, is it entirely coincidental that 2 people are being brought on that have adjacent properties?
There's nothing more Traverse City than that. We're like
I
at
really-
most 2 degrees of separation, or in one case, an alley separating the 2 employees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Master Plan Leadership Team, I don't think we are meeting this week, are we?
No,
Was-
nope. In fact, Sarah's on vacation right now. We're just waiting kind of for the planning commission to get.
Okay. And the Mobility Action Plan Leadership Team's the same, right?
And that draft has been distributed to you all. I hope you take the time to kind of look through it to prepare when we do start that process.
Okay. Excellent. I'd like to open up for public comment. No public comment. So any other things for the greater good? Chief?
No question, Shawnee, I know you're probably already on it, but if you can kick out the 24 meeting schedule at some point.
Yep, we do have that created already, so we will
Awesome, thank you.
get that to you all. And please take a look at it. We try to anticipate all the holidays and
Yeah.
shifting and
Oh,
elections.
I
And
know.
we do have a couple extra elections this year. I know we have the presidential primary in February, and there may, I think there will be a primary in August because the county commissioners at least will be up, will they not?
Yeah.
They have the same cycle as the presidential?
Yes.
or 3 elections.
February 27th, August 5th or 6th, and then November 5th.
And some people may have additional elections, but that's a separate matter.
Okay, so since this is our last meeting before the holiday season, we did bring some holiday treats for everybody to have a
That's
little
awesome.
holiday cheer, and I am going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Let's go eat and snack.
I'll have a snack.